My name is Tom Lord, and this is part 1 of the talk, A WebOS for Collaboration and Its Ecosystem. I hope you had a chance to see part 0, where we introduced the general theme. This part of the talk begins to get into some technical aspects of the design of the web operating system. And so let's begin. So we're here to discuss how to build a web operating system. And we analyzed in our preliminary matters that a web operating system is a technological infrastructure for collaboration. It implies a sort of social and economic ecosystem within which collaboration takes place. Individual acts of collaboration arise within that ecosystem. A subset of those individual acts give rise to create the actual WebOS technology, or at least maintain and extend it. It's now time to begin to develop requirements for the technological component. And how do we do that? We'll start with the user view, what the users think about, and the most intimate sort of experience of users is in the individual collaboration. So let's begin with that. When we were speaking very abstractly, we came up with a list of terms to kind of characterize what we meant by collaboration. These were things like co-creation, communication, trade, and collective action. What do these have to do with technology? You can say things like, well, what is it that people are going to be co-creating? What sort of projects will people be undertaking when people communicate? What kinds of messages are they sending back and forth? Well, pictures, sounds, videos, documents, and by documents I mean anything from a software source code package to the great American novel. We can sum all of that up by calling it multimedia. I picked the word multimedia because it's a pretty good pun. It makes sense to artists, it makes sense to humanities departments, it makes sense to design professionals and so forth, but it also should make some technical sense to hackers. If you want, when you see the word multimedia, think roughly, perhaps even exactly, but roughly, all the things entailed when we talk about the MIME type multi-part multimedia. Well, what about trade and collective action? What is it that people actually trade, for example? What are the units of trade? I want to go and buy such and such. An example would be documents, messages generally. People subscribe to feeds and so forth. I come from a Unix background. We have a habit of simplifying things and creating interoperability between programs by reducing concepts to a minimum. We like to think of all such things as examples of files. What are files from a user perspective? Well, familiar concepts. Files have names. They're loaded onto the file system in a hierarchy of directories. Programs can be instructed to open and load files, to write files, sometimes to copy files, and so on. If files, in that generalized sense, are the basic unit of trade and collective action, how do they get around? How do they move around? Well, it's via channels like email, forums, online forums like blogs and wikis, and also streaming forums, streaming protocols, chat, voice over IP, things like that. Now, given these examples, if you're a high-tech industry talking head, talking to a broad audience, you'll probably want to form the generalization that all of these are species of the genus online community. I want to be a little more level-headed about that, not quite reach that far. And let's call these by a technical term. Let's just call them various forms of network. Each of these networks is defined by protocols of how things move through them. Let's call them networks. So, we're saying something about multimedia, files, and networks. Well, in what sense? Well, we're talking about networks of multimedia files. We'll add that to our summary of collaboration and return to considering the rest of our little triangle feedback loop here as we further develop requirements for the web operating system. we have this notion that we're going to put users first, and the second most intimate thing, user-facing thing, is, of course, the ecosystem, the community structure, the dynamics of that. So let's take a look at that. Earlier, we abstractly described the ecosystem as the part that provides cultural conventions and trade relations. What technical requirements fall out of this? I propose free association. One collaborative ecosystem is better than the next if the technology comprising it imposes fewer restraints on who can collaborate with whom and under what terms. Shared workspaces. Collaborative projects typically need some hub, some center, at which to collect materials being worked on, archives of messages sent, and so forth. Shared publication. People need opportunities to self-publish the works that they create. Reuse. Well, as we know from software and music and lately video, reuse is particularly important to the way people like to use and profitably, usefully use collaboration. A special case of that is adaptation. Often the reason people want to collaborate on the web is because there already exists some work on the web that is so close to what they need, but not quite perfect, and they come together to make the necessary changes. Where does that leave the concept of authorship? Collaborative forms work best when they provide facilities that allow for, at the very least, some form of attribution, so that people get credit for the kinds of work that they do. A familiar shorthand for all that is remix culture. And if we're going to have technical features in support of a remix culture, we ought to also consider the legal infrastructure necessary to sustain such a thing. So we can look at, for example, licensing, things like Creative Commons, or the licenses from the free software movement, or if you prefer, the licenses from the open source definition. Licensing isn't the only legal issue. We can also consider that in collaborative cultures, sometimes people trade not only documents and ideas, not only form communities, but trade money. So let's remember fees, tips, and wages. Sometimes they play just for fun, or kudos, karma points, that kind of thing. Sometimes people participate mainly to bring about a political objective. Whatever the case, we can call all of these things, speaking somewhat broadly, contracts. We need technical infrastructure that helps people to manage the complex webs of contracts that come up when they collaborate. Licenses and contracts are all well and good, but they're meaningless unless there are actual markets in which to use them. We need market makers. We need people to provide hosting and publication services for collaborative projects. We need technologies in support of that. Ideally, these services are accessible in all measures by anyone, anywhere. We can sort of say we would like free hubs where we're talking about free as in freedom, not necessarily free as in price, although certainly the price should not be high. Which leaves the concept of the WebOS itself. What programs are we actually going to build? That'll be the subject of part 2 of this talk, next video, wherein we'll take everything we just discussed and turn it into a set of requirements for speccing out these programs. Thank you very much. See you in part 2.